It's a word that people do not want to hear in today's society. It's a fact of life, even in the church. There are some conflicts that could be so important to solve. It is all about how it's approached. Our text speaks about conflicts which come down to disputes over facts, values, goals, or beliefs. As an example, your church may want to remodel a room, or there may be people who think that a new roof should be put on. There could also be a conflict on this. Even though both may be deemed important, the church budget may only allow for one of those jobs. Other examples of conflicts include what music style to use, how often to serve communion. It might even be an interpretation of a Bible verse, what time to offer services. There may be conflicts for leaders handling the situation, or how the church building should be used for functions. Problem also is that problems may cause a pastor self-doubt about handling such situations. It's important to know that if we're arguing on principle alone, we begin to tell ourselves that it's an issue of false and true faith. People will wonder, whose side are you on? We need to assess the conflict and know that the congregation's experienced with conflict in the past. Do the conflicts lead to growth or cutback? When there is conflict, what is the group's capacity for making changes? When people are hurt by conflict, they fear and avoid it. The more there has been, the more cautious we need to be. When there's a congregational or congregational conflict, we can either ignore the situation or we can intervene. We need to look and see what the conflict is really worth it, or as we do not want to destroy parish life. It's best to assess the issue in early stages. First, we need to obtain as much information as possible. Sometimes these conflicts occur because of miscommunication. It's not a threatening step, but it's only seeking better understanding of the situation. Second, we need to buy as much time as possible. We don't want to make a quick decision. We want to think it through. If we buy time, it allows time to work out differences and seek alternatives. This allows us to think wisely. Third, make an assessment of the individuals of the potential conflict. Are any people who are involved troublemakers, trying to create a crisis when there's really no conflict? We should also examine our motives when we review the individuals. Fourth, we should take an emotional temperature on the conflict. If the anger is high, how can we start a cooling off period? If we use humor in the situation or some distraction, we can bring the issue down to a more manageable level. The pastor should bring everybody up to date about the situation in the group and that they know all the facts. Otherwise, how can the decision-making be successful? It's important to know that the history of conflict, people will realize that it's not so simple. The pastor can refer the conflict to a proper committee for discussion and recommendation. And also, they can add people who will help the group in conflict to a constructive engagement. When all this is done, it can delay making the decision and a proper analysis can occur. It really comes down to testing the waters at times to see what works best. And there should be a purpose of the course of action decided upon. And pastors should be prepared to absorb misunderstanding and even rejection. There's a process of mediation where you could remain neutral and come up with a compromise. With mediation, we can encourage others to approach issues with a different perspective. It can help them see points they may have not seen before. We can also help people to see their true motives. Also, with the right steps in mediation, we can help the individuals or groups look to the future in a more peaceful, compromised way, as long as we do not compromise the Word of God. Can conflict ever be positive? It can be positive. In conflict, the church group can be energized. If there's no dissatisfaction, no vision, or anything better, no pain, there's little chance for action. If a church has a healthy amount of tension, the church is a living church. The conflict can help people to be more creative and resourceful. People can gain different insights and avoid things like pressure building up within the church. Conflict is not necessarily wrong and unchristian. Dealing with it openly affirms the issues are worth fighting over, and we can resolve them without destroying each other. It is also important spiritual emptiness be exposed and ministered than to let it fester. It comes down to prayer, wisdom, and God's grace to handle conflict appropriately.